David Banks' 1988 book The Cybermen is not just a guide on how to appreciate certain episodes of Doctor Who in a different order. It also clearly affirms that the topics of robotics, cybernetics and artificial intelligence, both in the real world and in the land of fiction, are not easy things to cover, nor are they in any way straightforward. There's one paragraph in particular that jumped right out at me when I was reading this book for this video, and that is when it talks about the Industrial Revolution and certain technological progressions made therein, particularly in Europe and in the United Kingdom during the early 19th century. In particular, the word automation screamed at me from this paragraph, and the reason for that is that I am also reading a book titled Blood in the Machine by Brian Merchant. This book is all about the rise of the Luddite movement during the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, and how working class people were fighting back against big tech because this big tech was threatening to completely destroy their livelihoods and making working class people essentially obsolete in favour of inferior products. The book seeks to draw parallels between the trials and tribulations of the Luddites in the 19th century and also the modern day plights of various people in various industries whose jobs are being currently wiped out through the rise of AI. This topic interests me personally. The reason why is because I'm particularly concerned about one particular branch of AI, and that is the branch of generative AI, or more specifically generative AI in writing, because I like to write. Creative writing is a firstborn passion of mine, and therefore if I'm going to go on a tirade against things like ChatGPT, then I need to know the facts. I need to be able to articulate my arguments properly and use information, not conjecture. Otherwise I might resort to cheap tacky jokes, which you'd never see me do. And it just so happened, distinguished followers, that during the week when I was attempting to put this video together, I read a section in Blood in the Machine where it talks about the ancient history of human beings telling tales of what was essentially artificial intelligence. And these examples, such as the golem made of mud and magic in Jewish folklore, can also be read in the David Banks Cybermen book. Now, in the most simplistic terms of what people probably think when they hear the term artificial intelligence, I don't consider Cybermen to be that. After all, they have human brains. They are more leaning towards the aggressively cyberdized human aspect of fictional character. They're basically cyborgs rather than a form of AI. But I also learned that you can't really talk about one without talking about the other. They all stem from the same tree. And as far as I can tell, the point where the line blurs is where you have the machine that has become so sentient, it is in essence a living creature, but then you also have the human that has been augmented so much that it thinks like a computer. This is a topic that fascinates the hell out of me, but it is complicated and I am an ape. Can Cybermen be contextualised for the modern world? If Doctor Who were to come back stronger than ever by some miracle and it had new Cybermen adventures, what would those Cybermen be saying about the modern world around us? Is the concept of augmented humanity now a kind of obsolete, irrelevant and outdated thing to draw the concept of a monster from? I just don't know. But if I was going to go into that much depth for a video, then this would be the ideal place to start. This is the 10th planet, where it all began. The brainchild of two highly creative minds in the world of Doctor Who. You had Jerry Davis, a writer and script editor who had been taken on by Inez Lloyd, producer at the time, to bring Doctor Who forward, leaving behind all the historical stories and leaning more heavily into science fiction, and thus bringing more credible science into that science fiction. For that, they needed something of a scientific advisor. Cue Mr. Kit Pedler, a scientist, ophthalmologist, and a man who generally had a brilliantly creative perception of the world around him. He had given various presentations and lectures on the BBC, and he was a man who was also slightly unnerved by the progression of surgery and prosthetic limbs. Kit Pedler wondered to himself, when does it stop? When does a person become so encumbered with prosthetics that they stop being human? So Jerry Davis and Kit Pedler got together and they cooked. And their first outing was not the 10th planet, but the War Machines. The War Machines is about a supercomputer that takes over a post office tower and can then declare basically war on humanity, and this most certainly leans a lot heavily into the more generic classic tropes of artificial intelligence than anything Cybermen related. And from the War Machines they cooked again, this time splicing various ideas of cyberdized humans and twin Earth planets draining our energy to create the blueprint for what would become the first ever Cybermen story. So this would be an ideal place to start, but if I was going to go into that much detail about the concept and the philosophy of Cybermen, I couldn't just stop there. Not only would I have to talk about every other Cybermen story in Doctor Who's history, but I would also have to talk about all the other stories in Doctor Who which features a level of artificial intelligence and cybernetically modified human beings, and there is a lot. I've even got a Patreon request coming up for one, which I'll probably drop next week. So the way I got it figured, folks, if I was going to go off on that kind of a tangent and go into that much detail on the history of artificial intelligence and cybernetics, not just in Doctor Who, but the whole of science fiction in general, I would either have to create an exhaustive expanse of short videos or disappear for 4 months and then come back with a long-form video essay. And then I've got to ask the question, is that appropriate for my humble Doctor Who channel? Am I giving the people what they want, or am I indulging in some kind of self-pleasing ramble where there is no real objective or conclusion? I just haven't figured that out yet. And so we get to the 10th planet, we get a review of the 10th planet, and I just got to talk about this serial itself on its own. It's the only way. Because the philosophy of cybernetics, Cybermen, artificial intelligence, and all that gubbins, it's a separate thing from just objectively and subjectively reviewing an episode of Doctor Who unto its own. And that is going to be the purpose of this video. But this in itself is no easy task. Within the confines of those 4 episodes and their production, there is still a hell of a lot to talk about. The 10th planet is a benchmark story times 2. Not only does it give rise to the second most popular monster in the history of Doctor Who, but it is also the goodbye to a one Mr. William Hartnell. This is Hartnell's last story, and it is a bit of a sad, troubled ending for the man for a number of reasons on a number of levels. First and foremost, William Hartnell just wasn't very well when this episode was being filmed. He was suffering from undiagnosed arteriosclerosis, which meant he had trouble reading his lines and kind of just having a cognitive sense of what was going on around him. This was covered poignantly and excellently in the 2013 biopic An Adventure in Space and Time, where you see Hartnell's passion for the role never really subsiding, but his health and mental well-being deteriorating to the point where he simply could not function in that environment anymore. And you see this when you watch the 10th planet to a degree, and it gets a little bit complicated because there are moments where it seems like he is giving so much vitality and so much charisma into the role, and yet you do kind of get the sense that maybe he's not 100% aware of everything that's happening around him. You get the sense that maybe he is ad-libbing to a point. There are certain scenes where it appears, and I could be wrong, where Hartnell's kind of operating of his own volition, kind of talking out of cue, and there are clearly moments where other characters are filling in the gaps for him. And for episode 3, William Hartnell fell ill and couldn't appear for that episode at all, and so it was up to other actors such as Michael Craze, who played Ben, to essentially carry the entire story in his absence. But as far as I'm concerned, watching this episode, there is no denying that despite all of the problems, William Hartnell is consistently bursting with charisma and energy. His standoffs against the Cybermen are nothing short of excellent. Really, just the steely look in his eyes, the determination and charisma through which he projects his dialogue. He's not a well man, and it is clear that he's not well through a lot of this, and yet he still plays the character of the Doctor to a T. So the Doctor, Ben and Polly land just outside of the snow-capped space station in the South Pole in the deep, deep future of 1986. They failed to predict the mullet. And a group of military personnel on this space station are monitoring the progress of the Zeus 4 space probe, which is manned by two pilots, Williams and Schultz. I think it's always worth noting when there is a credible black character in 1960s Doctor Who, because those examples, unfortunately, are pretty rare. The other example that immediately springs to mind is Rudolph Walker's character in the War Games in 1969, which is quite a long way off from this one. So the recurring settings and locations for this story are the main HQ of the space station, the International Space Command Center, the interior of the Zeus 4 probe, and the outdoors. A brilliantly composed set where they blew what is surely an unhealthy quantity of polystyrene into shot. The whole thing looks so aggressive and therefore marvellously effective. You can really kind of feel the bitterness and the coldness of what that location would have been, despite the fact that most of the snow blows directly sideways, although I suppose it would be that windy in the South Pole that maybe it would do just that. Either way, it works perfectly. And when you really think about it, you can't get much more of an ideal setting for the first ever appearance of Cybermen than that. A lot of the military personnel are dead annoying, and one of them is a right perv, but don't worry, they're all gonna die soon. The main supporting character here is General Cutler, a guy with a great deal of American swagger, and he uses somewhat interesting phrases such as, "Don't sit there like a lot of frustrated penguins," and "We're gonna get you down as sure as God made little apples." He seems on board with the Doctor and his companions at first to a degree, and you kind of think that he's gonna swerve more into being the main helpful supporting protagonist of the episode, but if anything he kind of goes in the opposite direction, which is interesting to watch, and more on that as we unfold in this story. The first time you see Mondas is on this small screen with this foreboding music cutting in, and that is absolutely superb for reasons that I will go into in due course.
Very clear, but it's a planet, all right.
How could it be? Planets don't just appear.
It must be on an oblique orbit. It's approaching quite fast.
Interesting also is the fact that this story was made in 1966, and therefore Ben marvels at the fact that people in the future are able to come and go on the moon as they please. The real life moon landing, of course, wouldn't happen until 1969. And he also talks about how computers are taking over people's work. So the Doctor is immediately snared by the problem of the Zeus 4 probe being pulled out of orbit. And the thing pulling it out of orbit is this mysterious new planet that's just turned up out of nowhere. When Mondas approaches, the International Space Command Center gets alerted, the Secretary puts the planet on high alert, and just like that you have a global crisis. There is an upside down version hovering outside of our planet. And the way that this is put forth on a shoestring budget is pretty good. You know, the whole purpose of the International Command Center is to put the audience outside of this small boxed in location of the South Pole and bring the entire world into this problem. And even the shot of the planet spinning on its axis with this cloud blowing in, it all just works really well. It reminds me in essence of New Who, the way this builds up to something exciting. This is a belter of an opening episode, make no mistake, and then a small saucer lands. Oh boy, here we go. It's time, folks, the debut appearance of the Cybermen. So like I said, these bitter, harsh conditions and those three obscured figures pacing slowly over that ominous music, I don't think they could have constructed a better introduction for what was one day going to be an iconic villain than this one. For me, it's all perfect. The title, The 10th Planet, gives nothing away as to what the audience are going to come across in this adventure. And when these robotic-looking figures do turn up outside the TARDIS, strike down their foe, and then you see a human hand pressing down on the fur coat of the dead body, I wonder what audiences must have been thinking when they saw this for the very first time. And then the camera pans up and then you see that face. Best cliffhanger since Barbara screaming, bar none. Look at it. I mean, we all know what a Mondasian Cyberman looks like. I've talked about them extensively on this channel, and by the way, what I have never done properly is I've never really broken down the 10th planet to a molecular level on its own, which is the reason why I'm doing this video now. And just seeing that for the first time, I've never quite been able to work out if you're supposed to acknowledge the human eyes within, or whether that's a gaffe in the production that they couldn't really cover up, or whether you are supposed to acknowledge that there are the faint echoes of a human being inside this robotic shell. But there you go. It's bloody terrifying. Excellent stuff. And the entire aesthetics of this story is a little bit of a departure from the rest of Doctor Who. You get these X's and N's and zeros glitching across the screen at the beginning and end of each episode, and even the presentation of the end credits is entirely different and a lot more futuristic and, yes, scientific than anything that we saw in Doctor Who previous. This was a story that really was trying to cement a brand new gimmick for Doctor Who going forward. And you can see it and you can feel it. Anyway, there is a horrific scream, cheers for that, Polly, and the Cybermen are exposed in their full, bizarre, robotic, strange, clothy glory for the first time in Doctor Who ever. These costumes were designed by Sandra Reed, who would go on to design the later models of Cybermen, and they are a mixture of compelling and troubled, which lives on in many iconic testimonies surrounding the production of the 10th Planet. Like the actress who played Polly fondly remembers laughing at these creatures, and the production crew would also cite how these costumes were a nightmare to work with, how they were held together by sticky tape, how bits kept falling off. Some of that you can actually see during the course of these stories, and how there was certain cosmetics and certain components to this which just didn't work. For example, the headlamps did actually have functioning bulbs, but the bulbs would keep exploding. The actors playing the Cybermen were around 6 feet tall, which was great because it made them look physically imposing when they were standing in front of the human characters. When it came to the task of them being filmed in the South Pole setting, it was an absolute nightmare because it was September, it was very hot in the studio, and they kept on falling over. There is photographic evidence of the production crew having to pull them back up. No wonder they look so miserable in those scenes in Adventure in Space and Time. So the physical appearance of this debut model of Cybermen is the stuff of legend, and so are the voices accompanying. It was another Roy Skelton voice modulator job, the kind that was used for the creation of the Daleks back in 1963, although this time around Roy Skelton had a different approach to voicing these Cybermen, and so you get the kind of up-down voice effect of their vocal presentation.
I told you it is impossible for them to get back now. The pull of Mondas is too strong.
Package it all together and you have something that is very distinct. I love it. Of course I love it. You know I love it. The Mondasian Cybermen, of course, lives on in Doctor Who legacy to this day in audio stories such as Spare Parts, Quintessence, Genesis of the Cybermen, in modern Doctor Who TV stories such as World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls, numerous comics, expanded fiction. The Doctor Who universe has made sure that these particular models of Cybermen have a legacy that is fully distinct and separate from the legacy of other types of Cybermen. And this is what kind of helps you, in essence, get through some of the clunkier moments of this original story. So back to what I said before about the opening of Mondas in the previous episode being a brilliant way to introduce a planet. Part of that is kind of having the pre-planted knowledge of the legacy of Mondas planted in your head. Like I said, you've got numerous stories covering the backstory of this planet in alternative timelines. You've also got lots of stuff talking about Mondas. You've got a bunch of videos that I made, and it all goes together in your brain. So when you get to this shot in the 10th planet, it's not just a small dot on the screen. No, it is an entire mythology wrapped up in a preconceived notion of what this was at the time. And I think the same goes for the Cybermen themselves. They are essentially clunky. The size of their guns and their chest units were wholly impractical, and the reason why you had the Talosium model as first seen in the moon base was because production and Sandra Reed were slimlining this just so it was bloody easier to work with. Same with the voices as well. You know that I love the Cybermen voices, right? And they work really well at the beginning of this story, but in later episodes of the 10th planet, it is most certainly hammed up to a ridiculous degree.
Report to me as soon as you are ready. We must have time to evacuate.
Some of the physical mannerisms, such as the hand gestures, are a little bit over the top, but I suppose we've come to love and appreciate that from certain models of Cybermen throughout Doctor Who. It's fine, but I think the thing that really betrays what we know and love about Mondasian Cybermen in this story is some of the dialogue, some of the choices of word. Like, for example, when General Cutler presses an alert button under the table, the lead Cyberman, Krang, states that that is most unfortunate. And later on, he's got a microphone because he's trying to get information and testimonies from each of the humans, and there's one point where there's a lot of people talking at once, but I swear down he says to Ben, "Your name, please." Also, the continuity as to whether or not their mouths are actually supposed to be moving when they talk is really inconsistent. Personally, I find it a lot creepier when they just open their mouth and leave it open while their voice box does all the rattling underneath. I guess that the production crew couldn't fully always 100% lock in on the concept they had on the table here, but the root ideas put forward by Kit Pedler shine through really well in other aspects. For example, the main cyber leader Krang spills all the beans on what Mondas is and the history of his people, how they were dying, how their body parts were replaced by spare parts, and how weaknesses such as human emotion were removed, presumably so they could tumble across the stars with greater clarity. This makes Cybermen a fully logical but fully heartless race, and one of the first things that the Cyberman talks about is how he doesn't care about people dying. After all, as he states, people are dying on their planet all the time anyway.
Emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir?
So the concept of the Cybermen and their ruthlessness are laid out before the audience rather quickly and efficiently. The first example of their cold-hearted nature is when the Zeus 4 capsule is destroyed. You see Schultz and Williams actually in the pod getting completely brutalised by G-Force, and then their appearance on the monitors within the HQ both blinker out one after another. And that's it, they're gone. What a vicious way to die. And just like that, Cybermen have declared war on humanity. And whether or not you think this initial execution of Cybermen is successful, you cannot deny there are certain moments where it works very well. For my money, this is the creepiest moment, bar none. Look at those eyes. Now, in terms of power level, you would think that being able to bend a machine gun makes these a physically indomitable force, and they should be, really. That is how I like to think of my Cybermen, even in their early forms. And yet, these guys, they kind of get bumped off pretty easily and pretty ridiculously. Like, Ben steals one of their guns and takes them down, and then later on, there's a second wave of Cybermen that land on the South Pole, and 3 of the soldiers with 3 of the guns hide hide in a bunker and just pick them off effortlessly. And it's kind of like, surely they should have put up more of a fight than that. Don't get me started on the radioactive isotope thing either. But here we are, I suppose it's tea time TV and the good guys have got to win. So it's the Cybermen's plan to drain the Earth energy and get Mondas to absorb that energy so they can prosper while humanity dies. And this plan is not without its charity. They want to take every living human off of planet Earth and bring those humans onto Mondas for cybernetic conversion. And with the bubbly charisma of their voices, it doesn't sound quite as insidious and sinister as it does when, say, Tolossian Cybermen put forth that idea, but they still don't want it to happen, and I can't really blame them. For the longest time, I mistakenly thought that the iconic line of "You will become like us" originated in Tomb of the Cybermen, but no, they said it here first. The entire groundwork for Cybermen was laid out in this story, make no mistake. And this story of the 10th planet is by no means a small introduction. It's interplanetary war, and you get this marvellous bit of perspective that they put at the end of the second episode, where they look on the radar and see a collection of numerous dots, and each of those dots represents a Cyberman spaceship, each containing a certain number of Cybermen. I love the effectiveness of little visual elements like this when they wanted to portray large-scale things in Doctor Who, but had by no means the budget to do so. So from this perspective, this story is actually a lot like The Invasion, more so than I think a lot of people remember. The Invasion itself is actually set from human planet Earth perspective before this one, even though nobody seems to remember that. The Invasion was in the 70s, this is in the 80s. And yet, that's not referenced because the story hadn't been made yet, obviously. But it is still a full-blown invasion of planet Earth by Cybermen. The secretary in the International Space Control Center even says that there are Cybermen landing everywhere. Worth noting also, before I actually get back to the episode itself, is that Hartnell's Doctor gives this somewhat bizarre indication that not only does he know about the existence of Mondas and Cybermen from some kind of previous encounter, but also that he knows how this story is going to go. He knows that Mondas is basically going to try and drink up so much energy that it oversaturates and explodes, which is why he is stopping the activation of the Z-bomb and other things and just trying to force people to allow events to unfold of their own natural sense of causality. There's no real indication of why Hartnell does this and how he knows of these events, and I can't really understand what people were supposed to think when they were watching this for the first time. Maybe people were led to assume that the Doctor was so wise and scientific that he just figured it out because he read the room. But obviously people are able to canonize this and build upon the idea that this is indeed not the Doctor's first encounter with Cybermen. Cue expanded media. Go find it. So back to the actual story itself, and we're in episode 3 now. Hartnell's not in this episode at all. The Doctor has a bit of a funny turn in episode 2 and is forced to lie on a bunk bed in a room with his back to the camera, so another actor could play that part of just lying down and doing nothing. Episode 3 is mainly centred around Ben and Polly carrying across the story. Ben is stealing Cybermen weapons, taking down Cybermen, and winning back the base momentarily. You've also got this interesting arc with General Cutler, who is gradually losing his grip on reality. He has taken the prospect of war with an alien race rather seriously and is taking the aggressive approach of sending a nuclear device off to Mondas to destroy it, and it just so happens that they have one of those in the base. It's called a Z-bomb, and he wants to get it up and running, and he wants to launch it to destroy the planet. And there is nothing better to calm the temperaments of a angry military general than to tell that person that his own son is being sent on a suicidal space mission. It all goes very wrong from there. Highlights of this episode include the arrival of an entire squad of Cybermen. Look at them go there. And this is a great visual, absolutely lovely to look at and iconic in its own right, but at the same time very frustrating because they all just get killed with 3 guns. Boo, I expected better than that. Ben tries to sabotage the bomb. He sneaks through a vent and is aided by Dr. Barclay, who is the voice of reason amidst the ranks of the Space Control Center. But when Ben reaches the warhead to disarm it, Cutler comes along and punches him off the balcony. It is there that he launches the rocket, and that leads to a very pivotal cliffhanger, and... boo. So you can't really call yourself a self-respecting Doctor Who fan without being seethingly angry still at the scrapped episodes, the missing gems of black and white Doctor Who. Scrapped episodes was something that affected the Troughton era with a great deal more severity than the Hartnell era, but the Hartnell era still suffered in bits, and arguably the biggest travesty is we have lost the final episode of The 10th Planet, the episode which says goodbye to the first ever Doctor, except in a limited quantity of telesnaps, which admittedly is better than nothing. And yeah, of course, I like the recreation of the animation. I think those animations do a sterling job of bringing some visuals to that audio in a very faithful capacity. So obviously, as you all know, we've got the actual regeneration transitional scene itself, which is certainly better than nothing, but there are some other great moments in this story which are now completely lost. When Mondas gets destroyed, all the Cybermen effectively melt and there is nothing left but the costumes themselves sprawled out on the floor. And people cite the destruction of Mondas as being slightly crude because they basically got a polystyrene ball and blue torch it until it melted. But I would like to have seen that. I imagine it probably looked cooler than a lot of people give it credit for. So the Doctor practically hops, skips and jumps out of bed and goes back to square off at the Cybermen, where he's giving some of his most vigorous dialogue yet. He actually tries to turn the tables on the Cybermen's offer of bringing everyone into Mondas and says, why don't you come and live with Earthlings in peace? I'm not sure exactly how that would work on the ground level, but it's very noble of the Doctor to suggest that, and it shows shades of the kindness and compassion of the Doctor's personality that we would see a lot more of later on, even if the concept itself, let's face it, would never have worked. Cybermen will Cybermen. But I suppose the Doctor didn't really know that at the time, or did he? So Cutler is killed, Polly gets put in this rather sleek-looking cyber chair. Nice to see some kind of interior of the cyber ship, I love it. The Doctor ends up in one later on, and the Cybermen are campaigning for the Z-bomb to be completely neutralised so it is no longer a threat to Mondas, and really all the protagonists have to do at this point is just to sit and wait and stall the Cybermen until Mondas is destroyed. And once Mondas is destroyed, the Cybermen themselves are destroyed, and that is the end of that. Invasion over, the Cybermen are done and dusted. Oh yeah, the rod. Ben's got a radioactive rod and he's just waving it in front of the Cybermen, which kills them. And then, according to some of the dialogue later, they presumably just leave those rods in the corridor. Not sure that was a good idea. Doctor Who really had a very blasé attitude towards radiation, but it works well enough on the Cybermen. After the Cybermen are destroyed and the threat of Mondas is completely neutralised, the rest of the episode focuses solely on this funny thing that is happening to the Doctor, this outside influence as he calls it. His old body is wearing a bit thin, apparently, and then he says, I must get back to the TARDIS, which is pretty much his last ever line. And then he goes into the TARDIS, you get these cool shots of him looking kind of ominous at various points, and then it happens, the big regeneration. Now, regeneration is sacred now, it is a big event, unless your shooty gat was Doctor. But nobody had any real concept of that at the time, so this was very mysterious. I like the fact that the Doctor doesn't really give anything away. I like the fact that William Hartnell's Doctor is seemingly submissive to this process. There's just something very kind of somber about the fact that William Hartnell is bowing out here, and that is shown through his performance as the Doctor. This idea that he's not quite ready to go, but he's willing to go through the motions anyway because he knows that there is no choice at this point. The whole regeneration process is an essential and iconic moment in the history of Doctor Who, which nobody can deny, and it's the generations and generations of storytelling that is built upon this that makes this specific moment so special. If you took that on its own objectively, maybe it wouldn't mean quite so much, and that is quite a good way of summarising the entirety of the 4-part adventure that is the 10th Planet. Much as I love the concept of Mondas and the backstories of Mondas, and much as I adore these creations, and I think I adore the general bigness of these more than the refined, easier to work with version that they had in stories such as World Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls. Personally, I think the Talossians were the next logical progression, and I think these models looked, sounded, and worked a lot better on screen. You know, that's just my personal preference. But when I watch The 10th Planet again, and when I look at this story again, I see a story that was actually extremely well crafted in many respects. Particularly the first couple of episodes of this adventure, it really builds on a lot of tension and a lot of suspense. You know, this arrival of an entire planet and this appearance of a creature based on cold-hearted logic that was once human but now isn't, is executed very thoroughly, and the setting of the South Pole is kind of the perfect way to execute this. Moments like that allow us to realise that Doctor Who was always awesome in its own right. I am going to declare The 10th Planet a winner of a Doctor Who story. The Cybermen were winners, and the Doctor's final moments were extremely well executed and extremely fitting. Rest in peace, William Hartnell. So, there it is. My review. I tried so hard to include everything I could think of in this review. I wanted to go everything but the kitchen sink to make this as full-bodied as I could, but I don't doubt that I missed something somewhere. So please fill in the gaps for me in the comments section and tell me what you thought of The 10th Planet. And in the meantime, if you want to check me out on social media, please visit my Blue Sky at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can also go and see me on Patreon at patreon.com/chosenchimp. For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower and request your Doctor Who topic for review. Your name will be mentioned in the video, and your contribution will go towards making this channel a bigger, brighter, stronger, better smelling place. Thank you so much for watching this video and for persevering with my incessant rambling. I hope you are all safe and well, and for the love of Pete and his world, please do have a good one.